Nixon took us off the gold standard, we've seen a split from that part of the population that actually works for a living in terms of producing something of value that then the universe then rewards, and those people that actually don't produce anything. And by that I would mean government, any lawyer, anybody whose job is to shuffle things around. In the first category, I'm putting the people that grow stuff, the people that are machinists, the people that run plastic pressing mills, this kind of thing. Those individuals that are manufacturers that actually produce some atoms, move them around, and you in some way consume those atoms. Even if it's, a plastic glass you're using at a ball game, you're consuming those atoms that someone had to produce for you. So those are the producer class. The producer class, since Nixon took us off the gold standard, have been getting shafted daily. You'll be able to plot a correlation in tick by tick between the rise of the 1% and the reduction of the middle class and the departure from the ability to have convertible gold for the U.S. dollar, for the world reserve. So once that occurred in the 1970s, 72, we end up with a situation where the producer class is drowning under the effects of the debt that is making up the difference between the gap, so to speak. Those people that are not producing, that are simply consuming, are demanding more of the producer class, but they're not contributing for it. They're not paying universe back for it, so to speak. And so not contributing for it, there's a deficit. In a very real sense, the calories that somebody eats if they don't grow their own garden, they create a deficit that has to be made up by a farmer somewhere, and this is where the exchange system of money comes in to get that deficit filled by that farmer's surplus. And so that's really how universe works at this basic supply and demand level across all, and it's basically a barter system backed by gold, digits, dollars, all of this sort of thing. So now, since the gold convertibility, though, the money, the actual species, the currency that's been circulating, has not been holding its value. All through the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was not the case. The dollar did hold its value, and the middle class thrived, and the 1% was very, very, very small and didn't make much money because they had to actually pay out real stuff to get real stuff back. Then Nixon took us off the gold standard and said we're not bound to reality anymore. Let's all party down and drink this illusionary beer. And they called the illusionary beer the U.S. dollar or the Federal Reserve note. And since then we've been drinking this illusionary beer, but at some point we wake up with the hangover of the illusionary beer and we've got to suffer through it. And that's where we're at now, where the producers, those guys that have been suffering under the degradation of the dollar, are saying no more. I can't support, as a producer, a farmer out there, he's saying I can't support 1,000 people with my machinery on the fields and stuff here, and also have to support another 1,500 people in a social system and still be able to pay taxes or be productive for myself. So I'm not going to do it anymore. And so that was the basic conundrum that society faces here. The cultural revolution of the past, say, 15 years or so, as we became more and more concerned about those people that choose to identify themselves with their genitalia to the exclusion of everything else, and to raise issues about it, as we move into these politically correct niche markets, so to speak, we are losing the producer class. We've lost them. And so what happened here was this last time was the military stood up and said, pointed fingers at the neoliberals, neocons, whatever you want to call them. It's just the same crew, Bush, Clinton. It doesn't make any difference. It's the supporting crew that is causing all the problems. And the military pointed fingers at him and said, y'all be crazy if you think you're going to win a war against Russia. And we're not going there. And so that was what happened in this episode. And so the cultural war that we have had in the past 15 or 20 years, which was being engineered to a certain extent, has failed. Now, the reason it has failed is multiplicitous. There's many, many, many different reasons at many different levels. But one of the primary reasons is that the demographics aren't there. So the cultural revolution that Mao was able to lead in his late leadership period, when he should have been shuffled off into, the old Chinese leader's home, he was able to galvanize a very young social warrior population and they took over the country of China, and he wrestled the power back from people that had undermined him over like 15 years or so. And so the same attempts, the same approach was used here with the, if you'll note, there's an amazing correspondence between Common Core and Mao's One Thought, One People. And the net result in Mao's case was a, was a rising demographic where the younger population, due to increases in food supply and so forth, outnumbered the older population, and they were able to force Mao's will out as social justice warriors. That has failed here in the United States because of one condition, and that's demographics. The millennials and the subsequent generations, while they're now voting and being activated, they are not sufficiently large enough to counter the emotional strength and the economic strength of the generations they're trying to oppose. Every time you hear the Federal Reserve say we're targeting 2% inflation, you need to put in a couple of different other words in your brain. Words have power. That's why they lie to you and use different words. They're targeting 2% inflation. What you need to hear is they are targeting 2% of my money. They're going to take 2% of my purchasing power. They want to reduce my ability to buy something by 2 cents out of every damn dollar. That's their goal. It's not a good thing. And they want to do this year after year after year. What am I to be left with? I had this friend of mine in the 60s who was a son of a baronet or something from England. I went to school with him, and he was really educated in economics at a time when all of us kids thought, economics was how many finnings there were to a mark, that kind of thing, right? And so, but he always said that inflation was the royals' way of politely stealing from the serfs.
Yeah.
And that's truly what it is anymore, and continuously. So we're kind of screwed. Now, the good news is we're at the end of the game. The reason that we're at the end of the game is because we face an extinction level event for our species over these next 10 years, or 20 years maybe. The extinction level event has to do with the return on investment for the amount of oil that we get for the amount of oil expended. It doesn't do you any good to to pump a barrel of oil out of the ground if it took you 2 barrels of oil to find it. It's a net loss. And in our species at the moment, in order to maintain our civilization as it is, we need something between 12 and 15 barrels return on investment for every barrel we put out, just to maintain the illusion that we're an operating, functioning society, just in order to pay for the people that are not producing. So in the worst case scenario, we're going to have an economic crash so horrific that will coincide with a mini ice age, that all of the people that are not producers, all of the people that are living by virtue of the debt being put on the society, all of those people will be out pulling tractors through the field, or pulling the harvesting equipment in vast gangs of humans, because we won't have the oil to do that, and this will be the only way we can get calories. That's kind of like the worst case scenario, maybe as early as 10 or 20 years down the road, as the energy supplies dwindle, because it'll get to a point of rationing. You can't, for instance, run a carbine off of a solar panel. You can't produce enough energy off of solar panels to run a civilization and harvest the food it needs to eat, because the food it needs to eat is a very brutally intense kind of energy consumption that solar panels just don't do well at. And you would have to have vast quantities of them in levels that we are just not prepared for. So we face an energy crisis unlike anything that's been seen before. And had we dealt with this back in the 70s, at the time that Nixon took us off the gold standard, he thought that was his solution. Okay, he thought that solved the problem that we were facing. It wasn't that. We were facing the diminishing return on investment for energy, oil, and we needed to radically alter our society for sustainability at that point in the 70s. Now we don't have that option, in my opinion. I don't believe that over the next 15 years we could effectively have a revolution that put us all back into small farms where 60 or 70% of us were in fact continuously employed in the production of food and other goods. It just does not seem rational in my mind that such a thing is going to occur. So faced with this huge problem that we've got over these next decade, let's say 2 decades to be generous, but I don't have a real solid feeling on that second decade. But in this next 10 years, we've got to come up with a solution. And that solution has got to be radical enough that it provides basically what you and I and everybody else will think of as, 0-point energy or Captain Kirk's dilithium crystal energy. We need something that's a solution at that level, an energy solution that's such a big breakthrough that it gets us over this hump instantly. And instead of having to worry about 20-to-1 return on oil dropping down to 5-to-1, which is not sustainable, we would suddenly jump to say, 1,000 BTUs coming in for every fractional BTU being used. And in that case, it's like, hey, you're golden. You could run steam at that level at 0.5% efficiency if your BTUs didn't cost you anything. And you could be an advanced steam society and have steampunk spaceships for all that matters there, because you would have the ability to produce the BTUs for a low cost, which we don't quite have yet. So Tesla isn't going to do it. The solar panel revolution isn't going to do it. Even their maximum efficiency, they're running at maybe 18%, and that's 18% in a very narrow range, and it's not continuous. I've run solar panels, and of course now we've got chemtrails everywhere, which greatly reduce the efficiency of the solar panels. So we're finding ourselves in this kind of a weird little bind that's almost forcing us to, in my opinion, to shut off all the supplies too, and then negotiate with the breakaway civilization guys. If you drill down deep enough, you can get all the oil you want. The problem is the cost of drilling down to achieve it increases your cost of oil that you have to put out in order to get that oil for every foot you have to go down. And so it's not a sustainable route for the 29 billion barrels of oil that we need as a global society. Here, on an annual basis, it's not going to make any difference what they do in terms of reduction. They won't be able to get the price up there. The reason that we're running into this is the same reason that we had the oil crises in the 70s, which resulted from Nixon taking us off the gold standard. We don't have value in our money anymore. So the money keeps degrading. They keep producing vast quantities of it, which so far hasn't produced any inflation because they've been able to keep it out of the system and stored in such assets as weird old art that, doesn't produce anything. So it's a non-productive asset. Or they buy buildings where they don't really produce anything, so it's not flooding the economy with the fake money. Now, the issue for us with the energy and the money goes back to the idea that it takes real effort to achieve a barrel of oil extracted from the ground. It takes real effort, calories, sweat, blood, all of this kind of stuff to get an ounce of gold out of the ground. But it takes nothing whatsoever for somebody in the Federal Reserve to push a button and create $100 trillion. And so we're now coming to the point where all of humanity is realizing, I think I'd rather have the real barrel of oil, and you can keep your $100 trillion. And so at that point, which is where we're at now, and which is where we were in the 70s, you have to rebalance your social order in order to survive and thrive and get beyond it, to rise above it. And we're not doing that. We're not rebalancing our social order. We're not taking a hard look at what's really ahead of us. We're living in this delusionary world where it makes sense to worry about painting our airplanes pink in honor of someone's gender identity, and then also to worry about who gets to pee where. Bear in mind there's been a cultural change at a very deep level that you probably won't grasp. I'm going to put this kindly, just because of your maturing years here, okay? And here's the thing, Guy. The cell phone represents freedom to the millennial generation the same way the cars represented freedom to my generation, my parents' generation, etc. We used to socialize by a way of cars. It was our way of socializing was to get into a car and drive to where other people who were also in cars congregated. None of that is required anymore because of this abstraction of socialization that's been reduced to the cell phone. So you've got it with you wherever you go. So there's no real point to moving your atoms around when even when you get there, if you'll go and look, you see all these, I've seen it myself. I'll go to places.
Virtually.
And I'll see people that are in parties. That is to say, they're in groups at places where people gather, Starbucks, restaurants, this kind of thing. And there's 5 people there, and they're all looking at
cell phones.
Not at each other, but their own cell phones. So why bother being there?